Here's a question that might sting a little at first, but stay with me, because the answer is going to change how you see everything that happened to you. What if the worst things a narcissist ever did to you had almost nothing to do with you at all? The insults that cut deep, the sudden coldness, the silent treatment that made you feel invisible, the cruel words that still echo in your head late at night, every single one of them served a purpose. But it is probably not the purpose you have spent months or years assuming it was. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on something most people never fully understand about narcissistic cruelty. You are going to see, clearly and honestly, why hurting you actually met a need inside them, a need so deep and so hidden that they could barely admit it existed. And once you understand that, something shifts. The whole story you have been telling yourself about what went wrong starts to look completely different, and that shift is often the real beginning of healing. If you have ever lain awake wondering how someone who once looked at you like you hung the moon could turn around and become cold, distant, or intentionally cruel, I want you to stay with this all the way through. The explanation is not sitting in the specific insults they threw at you or the specific ways they tried to wound you. It is buried underneath all of that, in the part of themselves they could never bring into the light, not even for their own eyes. If any of this helps you finally make sense of experiences that never quite added up, consider subscribing and sticking around, because every week we dig into the psychology behind toxic relationships, so you can stop turning the blame inward and start recognizing these patterns for what they really are. One of the hardest things to accept once you have lived through narcissistic abuse is this: the pain you were handed was never an honest verdict on your worth. It just doesn't feel that way in the moment. It feels intensely personal because the attacks are aimed straight at the things that matter most to you: your character, your feelings, how you look, how smart you are, the soft, unguarded parts of you that you probably only showed to them. Over time, it becomes almost automatic to think that if you had just loved harder, been more patient, tried a little more, the cruelty would have eventually stopped. But that belief misses something crucial about what actually drives this kind of behavior. It is not about you falling short. It is rooted in a sense of self that is fundamentally shaky, propped up constantly by the exhausting work of defending a fragile ego. When a narcissist feels insecure, criticized, rejected, or senses even a flicker of losing control over a situation or a person, an almost unbearable discomfort ignites inside them, and they scramble to make it stop. Instead of turning inward, instead of sitting with their own fear or owning any piece of responsibility, they push that discomfort outward, onto someone else. And the person standing closest to them is almost always the easiest target, because that person is the one they know best. They have studied your hopes. They know your fears. They understand exactly what you need emotionally. And over time, that understanding, which should have been a foundation for intimacy, becomes something else entirely. A weapon they reach for whenever they feel cornered. Their cruelty, in the end, has far less to do with the truth of who you are and far more to do with what they are frantically trying to outrun inside their own mind. This is also why you might notice they treat completely different people with completely different personalities in strikingly similar ways. The pattern isn't about you specifically. It travels with them because the source of it lives inside them, not in whoever happens to be standing nearby. None of this excuses what happened. It doesn't erase the damage or make the wounds disappear overnight. What it does is redirect the question. Instead of endlessly asking, "What is wrong with me?" you get to ask a far more accurate question. What storm was this person creating because they simply could not face their own insecurity? The instant you stop measuring your value by their distorted behavior is the instant their version of you starts losing its grip on your mind. For a narcissist, causing emotional pain often isn't an unfortunate side effect of conflict. It functions as a tool, a way of maintaining control. Healthy relationships tend to rest on mutual respect, a willingness to compromise, and a baseline of emotional safety where disagreements get worked through with honest, open conversation. A narcissistic partner, though, tends to experience the relationship through an entirely different lens, the lens of power. The question in their mind is rarely, how do we fix this together? It is closer to who is going to come out on top. So when they sense their grip on you loosening even slightly, they may reach for tactics specifically built to knock you off balance emotionally, going silent for days, harsh and disproportionate criticism, gaslighting you about things you clearly remember, embarrassing you in front of others, breaking promises, stoking jealousy, or withdrawing affection out of nowhere. Each of these moves plants a seed of uncertainty, and that uncertainty pulls your attention away from your own needs and redirects it toward one goal: winning back their approval. As the confusion builds, your confidence starts eroding. You might catch yourself replaying conversations obsessively, apologizing for things that were never your fault, or tiptoeing around them just to avoid setting off another painful episode. And here is the cruel irony: that exact shift in you is what cements their hold. The more depleted and unsure of yourself you become, the easier you are to steer. Even small gestures of warmth, dropped in after long stretches of coldness, feed this cycle, creating a flicker of hope that things are finally getting better and deepening your emotional attachment to them in the process. Eventually, you might start mistaking simple relief for real love, convincing yourself that a sudden return of affection means they have truly changed. In reality, that unpredictable swing between warmth and hostility is exactly what keeps the relationship destabilized, which makes it harder and harder for you to walk away. What holds the relationship together isn't genuine connection, it's uncertainty, a low hum of fear, and your ongoing search for some kind of emotional footing. For the narcissist, this dynamic offers something they crave: proof that they still matter, that they still hold sway, that they can still reach into someone else's emotional world and shape it however they please. It is a cycle built entirely around dominance, not intimacy. Here's a misconception worth clearing up. People often assume narcissists only feel threatened by direct criticism or outright rejection. But in reality, your growth, your emotional steadiness, even your growing sense of independence can rattle them just as much. A narcissist tends to feel most at ease when they believe they occupy the very center of your emotional universe. If your self-worth hinges on their approval, if your decisions bend around their opinions, if your mood rises and falls with theirs, they get a comforting sense of control from that. The moment you begin carving out your own identity, setting boundaries, chasing goals that matter to you, finding joy that exists independently of them, that sense of control starts to slip. A genuinely healthy partner would celebrate that kind of independence. To a narcissist, it can feel like a direct threat to their own significance. So they might start picking apart your ambitions, mocking things you have worked hard for, second-guessing your choices, or manufacturing conflict right when you are experiencing something good. Sometimes they go quiet or dismissive during your happiest moments, not because your achievement doesn't matter, but because your confidence is a quiet reminder that you no longer need them to feel okay about yourself. That reminder can stir up a deep fear in them of being abandoned, overlooked, or exposed as smaller than they need everyone, including themselves, to believe they are. Rather than sitting with those fears honestly, they will often try to pull you back down into self-doubt. Old mistakes get dragged back up. Unflattering comparisons get made. Your confidence gets chipped away, piece by piece, until you find yourself second-guessing abilities you once trusted without question. This may not always be a calculated, conscious strategy on their part, but the outcome always lands in the same place. When you doubt your own strength, you become far more likely to go looking for reassurance from the very person who planted that doubt in you to begin with. That gives them exactly what they need: a way to restore the imbalance that feels familiar and comfortable to them, replacing your independence with renewed reliance on them, and protecting the control they are so afraid of losing. One of the most disorienting parts of dealing with a narcissist is watching them accuse you with total confidence of the very traits they cannot bear to see in themselves. Psychologists call this projection, and it lets them keep painful emotions at arm's length instead of confronting them directly. Underneath a carefully built image of confidence or superiority often sits a raw, hidden fear, a fear of being inadequate, of being shameful, of being rejected, of being, deep down, a failure. Rather than face those feelings, they unconsciously hand them off to someone else. If they secretly feel weak, they might repeatedly call you weak. If honesty has always been a struggle for them, they may accuse you of being the dishonest one. If jealousy eats at them quietly, they might insist that you are the jealous one in the relationship. These accusations often feel completely disconnected from reality because they are not describing you. They are describing the parts of themselves they refuse to look at. Over time, being on the receiving end of constant blame becomes deeply disorienting. You might spend enormous amounts of energy defending yourself against accusations that don't match anything you actually did, questioning your own memory, wondering if maybe you really are the flawed person they keep describing. And that confusion does something else too. It pulls the spotlight off of their behavior entirely and keeps you locked in a state of constant self-scrutiny, while they get to avoid the uncomfortable work of looking inward. The more energy you pour into proving your innocence and defending your character, the less energy you have left to notice the unhealthy pattern unfolding right in front of you. This is exactly why conversations with a narcissist tend to feel like running in circles, exhausting, pointless, endlessly frustrating, with responsibility always somehow ending up back on your shoulders instead of theirs. Once you understand that this behavior comes from a desperate attempt to manage their own internal chaos, you can start to loosen the grip their words have had over you. Their insults were never a verdict on who you are. You were never the one who needed to change to make things work. Their cruelty was always a symptom of something they carried inside themselves, an inability to sit peacefully with their own mind. Hold on to that as you move forward. The next time you feel the sting of something they said, or the weight of their manipulation pressing down on you, remind yourself that what you're looking at is a reflection of their internal struggle, not a statement about your value or your potential. Your real strength is in your ability to name these patterns for exactly what they are. Every time you refuse to absorb their projection as truth, every time you hold on to your own version of reality, even while they try to gaslight you out of it, every time you choose your own growth over feeding their need for control, you are taking a piece of your life back. It is not a fast process, and untangling the conditioning that builds up inside a toxic relationship takes real time. But moving past the confusion and the self-doubt is absolutely possible. You are capable of deciding your own worth on your own terms, of building a life centered around what actually makes you happy, and of surrounding yourself with people who value you for who you genuinely are, not for how well you perform the role of feeding someone else's fragile ego. Keep trusting your own instincts. Keep protecting your peace. You deserve a life that isn't weighed down by someone else's unresolved dysfunction. You have already done the hardest part by seeking out the truth instead of staying comfortable in confusion. From here, the path toward healing and clarity belongs entirely to you. You are more resilient than you probably give yourself credit for, and your worth stays fully intact no matter how many storms they try to stir up around you. Once you understand how projection works, it becomes much easier to see why their criticisms often felt so strangely disconnected from who you actually are. More often than not, their words revealed far more about the burdens they were carrying inside than they ever revealed about the person they were aiming them at. None of this erases the emotional toll their attacks took on you, but recognizing the pattern can help you stop absorbing accusations that were never an honest reflection of your character to begin with. Before we move further into this, I'd genuinely love to hear your own experience in the comments below. Has there been a moment where you realized someone wasn't actually trying to win an argument with you? They were just trying to hurt you? Sharing your story might be exactly what helps someone else finally recognize a pattern they've been living inside of for years without a name for it. And if this conversation is resonating with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more psychology-based content designed to help you protect your emotional well-being. One of the more painful realizations that comes with recovering from narcissistic abuse is understanding how your own completely natural emotional reactions became woven into the very cycle the narcissist depended on. That doesn't mean you caused the abuse, and it certainly doesn't mean your feelings were somehow wrong or excessive. Anyone repeatedly exposed to criticism, manipulation, or emotional neglect is going to respond with sadness, anger, confusion, or fear. That's simply what being human looks like under that kind of pressure. The difference is in how a narcissist interprets those very human responses, and it is often nothing like how a healthy, secure partner would interpret them. Where a healthy partner sees your tears and feels compassion, where they see your frustration as an invitation to work through a problem together, a narcissist may see your visible distress as confirmation of something else entirely, proof that they still have influence over you. Your pain becomes reassurance for them, a signal that they can still shape your inner emotional state, and that sense of control can temporarily quiet their own deep insecurity, which means, unfortunately, that your reactions, the very reactions any reasonable person would have, end up reinforcing the exact dynamic that's hurting you. This is part of why they sometimes keep provoking arguments long after the original disagreement has technically been resolved. They might bring the same hurtful comments back around, flatly deny things you both know happened, dredge up old mistakes, or push very specific emotional buttons they've learned about you over the years. The point of this isn't necessarily to resolve anything. It's to trigger a response that confirms once again that they are still the center of your emotional attention. Even intensely negative emotions serve that purpose for them, because they prove your focus is still fixed squarely on them. Over time, a lot of people end up trapped in an exhausting loop, explaining themselves, defending themselves, pleading for the other person to finally understand the pain they've caused. Unfortunately, this rarely produces any real, lasting change because the interaction itself often reinforces the narcissist's sense of significance rather than resolving anything. Breaking out of this pattern doesn't mean suppressing your feelings or pretending the pain wasn't real. It means slowly redirecting your emotional energy away from chasing validation, accountability, or empathy from someone who repeatedly treats your vulnerability as a measure of their own importance, and pointing that same energy instead toward your own healing. In the beginning of a relationship, a narcissist can seem remarkably attentive, warm, and genuinely invested in your happiness. They notice the details. They seem to mirror your values effortlessly. They shower you with compliments and create this powerful sense that you have finally found someone who truly gets you. This stage can feel incredibly validating because it taps into a very natural, very human desire to be seen and appreciated fully. But this idealization phase is usually less about actually getting to know you as a whole person and more about locking in your admiration, your attention, and your emotional investment. As long as you keep reflecting the image they want to see in you, everything can feel almost impossibly good. The shift usually begins the moment ordinary reality sets in. You voice a different opinion. You set a boundary that puts your needs first. You need some emotional support of your own for once. Or you simply stop offering the constant unearned admiration they've come to expect. Instead of adjusting to the natural give and take that any healthy relationship requires, a narcissist tends to experience these completely normal moments as personal threats. The admiration they once counted on no longer feels guaranteed, and their disappointment gets redirected right at you. Slowly, compliments curdle into harsh criticism. Warmth cools into indifference. Patience turns into sharp, cutting contempt. Traits they once praised in you might suddenly get labeled as flaws. The independence they once claimed to love may now get called selfishness. The kindness they once admired might get dismissed as weakness. This dramatic reversal often leaves people scrambling to find the loving version of that person again, convinced they somehow caused the change. In truth, the shift usually reflects something happening entirely inside the narcissist, their inability to keep holding an idealized image of you once you show up as a fully human person with your own needs, your own imperfections, your own opinions. Instead of integrating both your strengths and your flaws into a stable, realistic picture, they swing between extremes, seeing you as wonderful one day and deeply disappointing the next. That constant back and forth creates ongoing emotional instability, leaving you in a near permanent state of trying to earn back approval that was never rooted in unconditional respect or real emotional closeness in the first place. There's another layer to this that's worth understanding too. Narcissists frequently put enormous effort into building a carefully managed public image, one that earns them admiration, respect, or sympathy from acquaintances, co-workers, extended family, or even close friends. To that outside world, they might come across as charming, generous, wildly successful, or supremely confident. That image isn't always a complete fabrication, but it is almost always incomplete. It emphasizes exactly the qualities they want other people to see, while carefully hiding the insecurity, the manipulation, and the emotional volatility that tend to surface only in more intimate settings. The people who spend the most time with them, naturally, are usually the first to notice the gap between the public persona and the private reality. And that is precisely why someone who starts noticing these contradictions can start to feel deeply threatening to a narcissist. It's not just that you see their flaws. It's that you have witnessed the uncomfortable distance between the image they've built and the behavior they've worked so hard to keep hidden. When they sense that you're no longer buying into the version of reality they've constructed, they may ramp up their manipulation in a frantic attempt to protect that carefully built image. They might accuse you of misunderstanding them entirely. They might paint you to others as unstable, overreacting, or too sensitive. They might work to undermine your credibility before you ever get the chance to speak your side of things. In some cases, they'll try to isolate you from the people who support you because that makes it much harder for anyone else to compare notes and start recognizing a familiar pattern. Their fear isn't only that other people will find out the truth, it's also that they will eventually have to confront the parts of themselves they've spent years successfully avoiding. Keeping that carefully constructed facade intact often matters more to them than preserving trust, honesty, or genuine emotional closeness with you. As a result, the relationship can become increasingly focused on protecting appearances rather than actually solving anything real. And the closer someone gets to seeing behind that mask, the more likely they are to run into intense defensiveness, hostility, flat denial, or desperate attempts to rewrite the history both of you lived through. Because to a narcissist, protecting the illusion often feels far safer than facing the vulnerability hiding underneath it. Here is the truth worth carrying with you above everything else. A narcissist's desire to hurt you was never evidence that something was wrong with you. It was always evidence of their own inability to cope with their own emotional reality. Every attempt to control you, diminish you, confuse you, or make you question your own worth revealed far more about their inner world than it ever revealed about yours. The more clearly you understand these patterns, the less power they have to write your story for you. Knowledge really does have the ability to turn confusion into clarity, self-blame into self-compassion, and fear into genuine confidence. Healing tends to begin the exact moment you stop asking why you weren't enough for them and start recognizing instead that no amount of love, no amount of sacrifice, and no amount of trying to be perfect could have ever filled the emptiness they refuse to face inside themselves. Your greatest victory here isn't making them regret what they did to you. It's reclaiming your own peace. It's learning to trust your judgment again. It's building a life that no longer orbits around their approval or their rejection. Every time you choose boundaries over chaos, self-respect over self-sacrifice, and truth over manipulation, you break just a little more of the cycle that once kept you emotionally trapped. The person who once believed they could control your emotions eventually discovers they can no longer control your future. And that, more than anything, is the outcome they never saw coming. Because the strongest possible response to manipulation was never retaliation. It's a life lived with clarity, freedom, and an unshakable sense of your own worth. If any part of this conversation shifted how you see narcissistic behavior, share your thoughts down in the comments. I'd genuinely like to hear them. Like the video if it resonated, subscribe if you want more content like this, and pass it along to anyone in your life who might need to hear this message today. Sometimes it really only takes one honest insight to help someone stop blaming themselves and finally start walking the road toward healing.